Okay, hello. We are in very exciting times, my friends. At the time I am recording this, it is Friday, June 19th. Sunday, June 21st is the season 3 premiere of House of the Dragon. It has been a 2 whole year wait since the last season. We did get a Night of the Seven Kingdoms in between, which was incredible, but we've really been pining for House of the Dragon this whole time, and it's finally coming back. So usually I do a sort of fully edited standard style of my videos, recap video before the seasons to sort of give a refresher on where everything is at, all the characters, all the story arcs. But to put it quite frankly, I simply do not have time to do that this time around. So rather than give you nothing, I figured I'd do a sort of free form off the cuff conversational style podcast, if you will, where I just talk about the upcoming season, the context behind it, where some of the characters left off, and my hopes and worries and just general overall thoughts going into the season. So this can be a sort of little time capsule, if you will, of where things stand in the series before the season starts. And we can sort of look back on this upload to see how things went this upcoming season and where deviations lied. So yeah, I think without further ado, let's get into it. So there's a couple of things I want to discuss right off the bat, which is the contextual burden of the season. I had talked about this during my video on the season finale, which I'll link below for reference. But essentially, the House of the Dragon team got screwed hard by HBO last season in the sense that at the very last minute, the season was written, planned out, ready to go. They were about to start filming, and they got a mandate from HBO to cut the season down from 10 episodes to 8 episodes, which is unenviable already. That's an incredibly difficult task to repace the season already. It becomes even harder when you can't do rewrites. So essentially, what was happening at the time was that the writer's strike was going on, if you remember back then. And so at the tail end of the season being written and this mandate being given, no rewrites can be conducted. So what they did is rather than I guess not rather than anything. What they did was they simply cut off the last 2 episodes from the tail end of the season and added a sort of conclusory montage at the end of episode 8, if you remember, that sort of left off where all the characters are out preparing for what would have been the final 2 episodes of the season, but now are actually the first 2 episodes of this upcoming season. And from what I've heard, just rumors without any spoilers, essentially what they did for these first 2 episodes is they did the same thing but in the inverse. So they essentially released what were planned as episodes 1 and 2 of this season, what were planned to be episodes 9 and 10 of season 2. So the final 2 episodes are going to be the first 2 of this season, essentially, is how they're going to repace it. And essentially what they did is they filled them in with, instead of a conclusory montage, they sort of add character work and writing and story building that makes it work as a season premiere set of 2 episodes. So it's sort of the inverse approach, but the same approach at the same time in a sense. And I really think that's the best they could have done with this tough situation. It just kind of sucks that the show is going to get burdened with this meta contextual burden that when people 10 years from now, let's say, go and watch this show, they won't have that context, and there'll be all these weird pacing and decision making questions that I think will frustrate a lot of viewers in the future. So I hate when there's corporate meddling like that, but I think it's just simply a case of the team doing the best they could, because like I feel like there were issues in season 2, don't get me wrong, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't. But I think a lot of people, at least in my circles, were way harder on it than I think they should be. I think it was still an incredible season. I think they did the absolute best they could in terms of like forming that conclusory montage at the end. So I was pretty overall very satisfied and still in love with the show at the end of season 2. And I have faith that they can carry it. There are some baffling decisions going into season 3 that I think are going to be worrisome. So there's also the meta-contextual context of the George R. R. Martin toxic butterfly situation, which we'll also give a little caveat of right now. So essentially, the author George R. R. Martin was very displeased with season 2. Obviously, an author is going to be a lot more of a stickler for an adaptation of their work than any normal, like, average viewer would be. So I think it's very, like, understandable and fair for George to be so hurt by significant changes that were made. Um but I think there's a important differentiator to make here in terms of changes that are blatant changes versus adaptation decisions, and that goes back to the format of the book this show is based on, Fire and Blood. So Fire and Blood is not a traditional novel in the sense of the main Game of Thrones: A Song of Ice and Fire series. It is a chronicle, if you will, of the events of this time in history from the perspective of maesters compiling this information. So there are many points throughout the story in which you get multiple voices on a given instance. So let's say, I'll just give a random example. Like, we don't know what happened in this particular room and this particular night with these particular characters. Let's say we have three interpretations of from people in court or people around that say what happened. It's up to essentially the reader to decide what their interpretation of canon is, and that's how the book is formatted. And it's a very interesting, experimental, and quite frankly genius format from George R. R. Martin. And the show can't work like that because it is a show. So the show is making decisions of what happened during, like, concretely, and I think that's fine. I think that's more than fair. I think that this is Ryan Condal's vision of what happened in the book, and I think that's totally fine. And I also think that they're doing a lot where they're adding elements that weren't in the book. So Rainier and Allison's meetings throughout season 2 were not in the book, but also I think it works and makes sense for their characters and the differentiation of their characters in this iteration of in the show. But also I think it makes sense because no possible chronicler could have known about these meetings because they were completely secret, you know? So I think it's fine to add that and make those extrapolations, especially since the dynamic between Allison and Rainier is very different in the book than the show. And I think this is something where the show excels over the book, actually. And I think is a better writing decision than George R. R. Martin's own in changing the dynamic between Allison and Rhaenyra. So, for context, in the book, Alicent is about 10 years older than Rhaenyra, 10 to 12 years older. I can't remember the exact number than Rhaenyra. And she takes on the role of the sort of evil stepmother character and that trope and that archetype, as opposed to the show's decision, which I think is a lot better of a decision, where it's a childhood best friend slash potential romantic partner that essentially dissolved due to the fucked up system in which they live in and turned them against each other and made them to resent each other. Well, it's this conflicting feelings because they still harbor this intense love for each other, but it's so burdened down by how society has broken them and spread them apart from each other. I think that's such a fascinating lens to approach these two characters from that I think is stronger than the traditional evil stepmother pushing her own kids over the kid of her husband, now deceased husband's first wife, which is a trope that's done to death. And while both are good, like, I love the book and I love the show, I think that this change in these characters is great. But it also necessitates the need for contextual changes like their meetings in the show. So I think that's totally fine. I think where George R. R. Martin is really taking intense issue and what created this toxic butterfly situation is that he is quite frankly furious about certain character removals and certain changes. He actually didn't get to express the full breadth of his changes. He only got to talk about the first couple in the first episode of season 2 before HBO actually said legally you cannot do this anymore. And George hasn't written, he has a blog that he maintains and he hasn't written like almost anything since then. So he's very much been like legally silenced on that front. And um it got so bad to the point where I believe George R. R. Martin and Ryan Condal, the showrunner, are no longer on speaking terms. George is not involved in the writer's room in any capacity any longer, and he's essentially been severed from the production of the show. And I think that's such a shame and such a tragedy, but I understand all sides of this conflict. I have sympathy for everyone involved because I truly in my heart believe Ryan Condal is trying to do justice to George's work. I think he is a genuine diehard fan. There are decisions throughout season 1 and 2 that only a huge fan and admirer of George's work could possibly have made, and I think that is genuine and caring and true. But I also think there are certain pressures from HBO, the corporation, and there's the process of making a big budget studio TV show in general that pressure him to make sort of adaptory decisions that clash with George's original work. So I understand and have sympathy for everyone involved, because I also see that George is obviously going to be hurt by such stark changes to his work. I would be hurt if my work was being adapted by someone I trusted and thought was faithful to it. I just think it's really weird that the changes in Game of Thrones, and this could have been a legal arrangement where he simply couldn't and maybe thought he could this time, but the changes in Game of Thrones were so much starker and so much worse, and yet George was pretty quiet about them. While here he was very adamantly vocal at the beginning, but then of course was forced not to. So I wonder if the legal arrangement was just different there, because I would be much more displeased with the adaptation of Game of Thrones than with the adaptation of Fire and Blood if I were George. So I think an issue of Toxic Butterflies that George wasn't able to get to because he was silenced in this sense, that I can foresee being huge, is the removal of a character named Nettles from the book. And I don't give any spoilers of the events ahead. I this is just purely just for show watchers only being able to access this podcast and these videos. So Nettles is a character that would have been introduced in the corresponding timeline of last season, and is a key character for both Damon's arc and Rhaenyra's arc. And I think her removal from the show, though not definitive, I have heard rumors from season 3 that essentially confirm that yes, her presence in season 2 was indicative that she's not going to be in the show, period. She's not going to be added in later. It also wouldn't make sense for her to be added in later because she appears and enters the story contextually during the latter events of the latter half of season 2. It just wouldn't make sense for her to like enmesh herself now. She is a key character that is a big catalyst for events in the story that I can't see how they're going to do otherwise. I do have faith that they can figure it out and do it, but it's a little disappointing that they would just remove this character entirely for seemingly no reason. I think what they're trying to do is give some of her character elements to Rhaena, because Rhaena, in the book, she went to the Vale, to sort of stay there for safety and to sort of consolidate the relationship between Jane Eyre, Jane Eyre and Rhaenyra's faction. And in the book, she just kind of remains there for the remainder of the war and doesn't really do anything until the end. And so I think their logic was like, okay, we have this character we haven't introduced yet that does a lot and is a huge catalyst for the story, and we have this character that we've already introduced that does almost nothing. And that's a George fault. That's not their fault. I think their thinking was, for TV show sake, we'll take some elements of Nettles and sort of like integrate her into Rhaena. I don't think it works. I understand what they're going for, and I could be completely disproven this season. I don't think it works because Nettles is a very different character contextually. She serves a very different thematic purpose in the story than any that Rhaena possibly could. They might try to do the same, like similar plot threads, but it just doesn't work thematically for what George was trying to say with the story. And so That is a huge toxic butterfly that obviously George wasn't able to comment, that I think is going to be a huge problem. And I've heard rumors that there are a few other toxic butterflies in the early episodes of this season that could spawn issues later. I don't know what they are, but I am a little worried about that, and it makes me a little concerned about how the story is going to go. I actually just finished a reread of Fire and Blood. Well, I'm at the tail end of it. I'm in the epilogue of it right now, so I'm going to finish it probably today. But I wanted to refresh myself of the events that are probably going to happen this season and get an idea in my head of where I think they probably will take the story up to this season, and then where they're split off for season 4. And it's going to be interesting how they decide to do this split, I think, because there is a good point that I think would be very like ironic and clever to end the season at without spoiling anything. But then they'd have to cram quite a lot into season 4. I think thematically it makes sense to end the season there, but I think they might have to go a little bit further. But then again, if there's only 8 episodes this season and the first 2 are finishing up what the last season was supposed to do, maybe they can do it if they do a 10 episode season 4. I don't know. I don't know. But that's just me speculating out loud. I really don't know. So in terms of what we can predict will happen this season, like I said, this is not going to contain any book spoilers. I'm simply going for show only viewers. I know what's going to happen, but I think what's exciting about this show is because of the adaptation decisions and also like the sort of filling in the blanks and kind of what I talked about earlier, where there are multiple ideas of what was going on proposed, and it's essentially up to the show writers to pick a determined path through that. I think it's still cool that I can watch this show and still be surprised and shocked and like not know what's going to happen next because of those adaptation elements. And I think that's a really cool and adds to the experience quite a lot for me. Like I felt like last season there were a lot of like big surprises for me, even though I had read the book, which was really awesome. Um, so I'm very excited for that. And all's to say, I will not be giving any spoilers. If we go back to where a lot of our characters are last season, we know about the conversation between Alicent and Rhaenyra, which was completely show original material. In the book, it's just at a boiling point where Rhaenyra decides, like, I have the opportunity now. I'm going to swoop in on King's Landing. Now is my best shot I got, essentially. Um, Whereas in the show, we get the context of Alicent essentially coming up with a plan with Rhaenyra, to where she decides ultimately, like, she's willing to sacrifice Aegon, sacrifice her son. And it's so fucked up and backwards because Aegon was a messed up, awful asshole, but like he would not be nearly as fucked up as he was now if he wasn't forced into this ruling position. And now she's willing to sacrifice him so she and Helena can get safety. Like she's essentially abandoned Aemond and Aegon as her like children in her mind and has decided that Helena's the only one worth saving. And tragically, she even proposes to Rhaenyra that they just run away together and start a new life from scratch. And Rhaenyra just can't do it, you know? She's just so heavily burdened by the expectations and traditions of her family that she just can't break free from that. You know, she can't start her own life. She has to see this to the end no matter what, even if she doesn't truly want it in her heart. Like it's just something she has to do. And it's tragic. It's tragic, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out because so many of the conditions of the deal are not going to be met. So the premise of why Allison proposed this now is because, you know, obviously Aegon's injured beyond the really capacity to fight back or do anything. And Aemond is off like scouring the crown lands and just mercilessly burning villages and things like that. He's off on this like violent crusade right now. So she knows the only person with authority left in the highest person with authority left in the Red Keep would be Helena, who she can obviously get to do whatever she wants. So she sees that as the golden opportunity. But we know from the trailer, it seems like that Aemon's actually going to be back. And he's going to be waiting for her when Alicent returns from Dragonstone visit. Like, and this isn't spoiler. This is just what the trailer shows, and it could be editing of the trailer. This could be wrong and not true. but that's the way the trailer's edited and designed to make you like see. So that's one thing that's going to be a big thwart, and I'm going to be very interested to see how that's approached in the show. But the other big thwart there is that Larry absconded with Aegon and spirited him out of the city, so they're now in hiding. And the key condition of this deal was that she would surrender Aegon to Rhaenyra for execution to cement her rule. And like, so if that part of the deal is broken, why then would Rhaenyra honor her end of the deal of letting Alicent and Helena go to safety? Like, this is just a disaster waiting to happen. And it's just these little elements that are so tragic and make the story so good. So it's going to be tough. And we also know that essentially the last conversation we saw between Rhaenyra and her dragon riders was that she was sending I always confuse the twins in these stories in this story. So there's Baela and Rhaena, who I always confuse, and there's Alan and Adam. I believe Adam is the dragon rider, and Alan is is the other. So I believe I'm right on that. I always get this confused, but so she essentially decides that she's going to send Adam, Ulf, and Hugh to essentially try to either take or wreak havoc on Lannisport and Old Town, which are the seats of House Lannister and House Hightower, respectively, which are the two biggest Green faction cities, essentially. And she's going to essentially either wreak havoc or have them take it. And that was what they were kind of planning to do before the conversation between Rhaenyra and Alicent. So I'm interested to see if she'll still have them go take that approach, or she'll be still like, okay, I need you guys back here. We're gonna do King's Landing now. So I'm interested to see how that plays out and goes. There are some indicators of this in the third trailer that they released, but I did a reaction to the third trailer. I would recommend not watching it if you haven't already and you're just a show only watcher, because it kind of spoils quite a lot. Like, for me as a book reader, it doesn't, but like, it's a little disappointing to see them spoil so much in a trailer. So I would recommend not watching that. We kind of get an indication of where this goes from that, but I'm not gonna say anything there. So we have that going on. We saw Daemon leaving Harrenhal finally. We don't know if he's going to essentially work on his Riverlands campaign, or if he's going to try to go down and connect with Rhaenyra in the taking of King's Landing from a militarily ground perspective. We don't know what approach he's going to take. It's left open to ambiguity there. What we do know is Daemon's sort of vision quest last season that he was having in Harrenhal, where essentially he, through Alice Rivers, who is an awesome character. She's essentially like very similar to Melisandre from the main series, but grounded much more in Weirwood and Old Gods magic instead of R'hllor magic. And she essentially serves as the catalyst for him to have this intense Weirwood vision sequence where he comes to realize, in order for the White Walker threat to be defeated by like Bran, Daenerys, and Jon in the future, he will need to help Rhaenyra sit on the throne now. He can't go against her. He can't make his own claim. Like, this is what he needs to do. This is what needs to happen in order for the future events to play out in the world to be saved in the future. And it changes him. You could see it genuinely changed him. A lot of his arrogance is probably, he still has an arrogant personality, but a lot of his arrogance toward the throne situation and Rhaenyra is probably going to be gone. So I think now it seems like his loyalty is fully dedicated to her. He's not going to make any sort of rival claim. This is also interesting because I think it's an ironic twist on the book where it's like they talk about like, oh, we have no evidence that Daemon was impacted by the magic of Alice Rivers in any way. I think it's like a line like that or something. And it's like during a stay at Harrenhal, and it's like, how would they have evidence? They weren't there. And I love how it's like, yeah, no, not only was he impacted by Alice Rivers' magic, he was like completely changed and fucked up by it. Like, and I think that's like such an ironic fun twist for his character. and it makes sense, like, with what his behavior later in the book is. So it's almost like you wonder if George had that idea in the first place, that he was going through this at the time, because like a lot of his decisions later in the story like do align with that. So I feel like that's a really cool change there. And it's not really a change, it's just an extrapolation of what would have been happening, which is really cool. Um so yeah, we we don't know where Larys has taken Aegon. He mentioned Bravos, which is, across the Narrow Sea in Essos. It's a city, a free city state over there. Um he mentioned that they transferred all their wealth, and I think he was talking about going there, if I remember correctly, from the end of last season. But we'll see if they actually do end up there. This is another interesting element, because when this happens, when they abscond together in the book, we lose that perspective. We don't get to see where Aegon and Larys are off to, and what misadventures they end up in. We don't get to see that, because we lose that ground perspective on Aegon. So obviously they're making it's a show. They got to keep one of their lead characters in there, so they have to make up events for what they're going to be up to. And it seems like from the trailer, at least, they're giving them things to do, which is pretty. I'm interested to see what they do with that, because we genuinely don't know. It'll be a surprise. In terms of who's next, just mentally thinking going down the line here. So we know there is, in addition to Rhaenyra's plan to take King's Landing, we know there is some sort of impending maritime battle as well, because we know that Corlys and Alan were essentially going to join the Black Faction blockade of King's Landing themselves and just bolster it in that sense. But they also don't know that the Green Faction was able to. They sent is Tywin Lannister? I always forget, there's two Lannisters. There's so many twins in this story. Two Lannister twins in this part of the story. I think it's Tywin Lannister. They send him across the Narrow Sea to treat with the Triarchy, and he successfully recruits the Triarchy to join him in breaking the Black Faction blockade of King's Landing. Led by Shara Kalohar, played by PhilosophyTube, another YouTuber, which is pretty awesome. And I think it's just it's so tragic and reflective of our real world, where they're just the politicians stepping back on years of gains and goals and work to just sort of fulfill a temporary need. And it's because, if you think about it, Westeros, like led by Daemon and Corlys, were like in war with the Triarchy for years and years and years to try to get back their territory in the Stepstones. And they finally had, and now Tywin Lannister's like, you can have the Stepstones back if you just align us for this one battle. And it's like it's just like it's frustrating. It's frustrating, but that's how real world politics be. So yeah, so we know that those two big sea armies are destined to clash. We know also that the Stark army has finally been mustered and is making their way down thanks to Jace's trading with House Frey. They were able to cross the twins, and they're essentially, it seems like they're going to be closing in on the Green Faction army of, like, House Hightower, House Lannister. Speaking of the Hightower army, we saw them at the end of last season with a dragon we had not yet seen before. This is another weird choice by the show, where I think they had made a decision, decided against it, and then decided like back on. They like flip flopped quite a lot with this decision, unfortunately, and that is the decision of the character Daeron. Um, in the book, Alicent and Viserys have a fourth child, together, named Daeron. He is the youngest of the Green Faction side siblings. So there's Aegon, Aemon, Helena, and there's also Daeron. Daeron, for some reason, did not appear in season 1, even though he should have been there, and was only mentioned in like random little spurts of dialogue in season 2. is that he's being like fostered in Old Town, which is true. He was being fostered in Old Town at that point in the story, but he was around for the events of season 1. So he should have been there. And now it seems like they're going to bring him back, but we also haven't seen him in any of the cast stuff and trailers. Like almost like his casting is going to be a spoiler. Maybe they got like an A-list celebrity for him or something, or maybe they're going back and not going to do him. By the end of last season, we saw a dragon flying with the Hightower army, which was his dragon. So it seems like their Daeron is entering the fray and it's going to be in the story. I think that's going to confuse a lot of viewers because it's like, hey, we mentioned him in dialogue once or twice, but yeah, there is a fourth sibling here that is going to be part of the story now, and he's just here now. And I think that's going to be a little weird and kind of like be a little stain on the show overall. But we'll see what they decide to do. Maybe they'll go back flip flop on it again and not include him. But who knows? So he'll be paramount in the Green Faction like ground campaign. But I also think that a new character, Orman Hightower, has been like propped up quite a lot in the trailers and the marketing and the press, and he's going to be key because he essentially we have Kristen Cole who's leading some of the Green Faction forces, but for the big like robust part of the Green Faction forces, which is mainly the armies of House Hightower and House Lannister and their like vassal houses, that's going to be led by Ormond. So interested to see how they characterize him because in the book he's just like stern military leader. That's it. Like they're not really don't really give him much character. So I'm interested to see like how much more depth they give him there because they did that with Gwaine as well, in which is Alicent's brother, who is also another high character. They gave him like quite a lot of character that I didn't have in the book. So I'm interested to see how they approach that. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think like what else we have to touch upon here in terms of characters. I'm just very interested to see how events going to play out because we were approaching like a few key big battles here. And you can kind of infer what they are with this whole maritime thing approaching, Rhaenyra being ready to take King's Landing, and also the Stark army marching down. These three big battles should have been the end to season 2, sort of tying back into what I was saying in the beginning. And they're going to be the outset of season 3, which is a weird pacing thing, but also builds the hype and excitement. Like, hey, we're entering season 3 with 3 big battles. That's crazy. And I think it would be really cool and a nice spectacle to get fans back into it. But I'm interested to see how they approach the rest of the season because if they start with 3 big battles and then not fizzle out in terms of story and character drama, because I think the character drama and story gets incredible from this point on, but there's not really, from my memory, like there's not gonna really be big battles until you get to like what I feel like would be season 4. But we don't know. We don't know how they're gonna pace it. We don't know what they're gonna change. So it's all up in the air now, and that makes it exciting. So there's a few things I have concerns for. Um, Particularly Nettles is a big concern because I feel like she is a huge catalyst for character development and events in the story that I feel like removing her is going to be very weird on how they approach it. For comparison, if you've read the Song of Ice and Fire books and also seen the Game of Thrones TV show, I feel like this is somewhat comparable to like the removal of Young Griff slash Vagon. Um, if you don't know, in the books, there is essentially a huge character that goes by the alias Young Griff. That is very important to the story that they cut from the story, which essentially necessitated them to have to create an entire, like essentially fan fiction for the last seasons. When they had material for that they could have used, they just essentially they changed it so significantly that they couldn't, and they just had to make shit up. So I worry what Nettles will do in terms of a similar scale cut. Not to the same scale. I feel like Fagon is a way more egregious cut, but we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, I feel like I'm going a little bit in circles here, so I think it's about time to wrap up. I am so excited to be watching season 3 with you all. Um, just a quick heads up. I don't know how this is going to go, but I'll give a warning just in case. I have an incredibly busy schedule coming up over the next few weeks. It's going to be very intense with a very little free time. And I do not know what my video making schedule will be like. There is a chance I will have to combine my videos for episodes 1 and 2 into one like essentially mega video in a few weeks rather than releasing it like this Sunday. I don't know. Um, yeah, I could be able to make both. We'll see just how the schedule plays out and time plays out. But as of now, I'm giving that warning that that might be what happens. So if you don't see a video from me like within a few days after the episode, just know that's probably what's going on. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to watching the season premiere with you all on Sunday.